Great. Cool. Shall we get started, Teresa?
Sounds good.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's kind of lunchtime session about how you can level up your LinkedIn specifically for corporate fundraising. I am really excited for this session, particularly because we're joined by Teresa Litza, who is an absolute LinkedIn mage. The way that you use LinkedIn is just really impressive. And I think for a lot of us in the room, LinkedIn can feel like a necessary evil or something we know that we could be doing more with, but we don't really know where to start. And so I'm really excited to start digging into this with someone who comes from a LinkedIn perspective rather than a corporate fundraising perspective. We're going to kind of run it as an interview format. I'm going to ask T some questions. They're going to ask me some questions. And if you have questions as we go, please do feel free to pop them in the chat. This session is for you to get from what you want to. So there is room for those questions at the end. But I just want to kind of start with a question for you, Teresa, which is, what do you think when it comes to corporate fundraising? What's the opportunity that LinkedIn gives us?
It's a really good question. And that's pretty much how we came up with the idea of running this session, because I would see more and more people from the nonprofit world on different job titles and wearing obviously many hats, that they wanted to spend more time on social, and now LinkedIn has become more engaging. But at the same time, it's very interesting. Every time I'm running a session training on LinkedIn, or no matter what your job title is, everyone says I feel too scared to join or like post something. I might be just on the background looking at what others are doing. And it's just an indication of how many people are struggling with similar things. And it's also interesting to see how LinkedIn, we have it in mind through the years as the place to go for job hunting, and it's still that. But also at the same time, it's interesting to explore how LinkedIn is going way beyond job hunting and marketing. And that's where fundraising and corporate fundraising more specifically comes in. It can be a really great opportunity if you think it's a very professional network. It's a professional database pretty much with 1 billion people. That means it's a great opportunity to connect with potential partners. You can also connect with those you already had some sort of relationship. And it's great because it's a good opportunity to stay in touch without necessarily having to do your pitch all the time. So it's more like a natural way to relationship building in a way that everyone is in the same space for professional reasons. So you know where you're coming from and you know what you want to communicate on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a kind of always on networking event, right?
And it doesn't feel weird because that's exactly where you're there.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think it's also really worth noting that there are people there that you would never meet in real life, but they are online and very regularly. So I really like that point about it's a great opportunity to stay in touch. So much of corporate fundraising is staying in people's minds as much as possible so they remember to reply to you, and engaging in their posts or posting yourself and coming up on their newsfeed is a really gentle nudge for that. Where would you say people should start? You mentioned often people are scared, they don't know where to begin. What would be the first steps you would take?
I think the first thing, it goes back again into feeling comfortable on how you use the platform. It's one thing to create a profile, but also you want to make sure that you test the ground on your own. So you want, for example, to go and look at your profile. When was the last time you updated? Many of us, they might have created the profile, let's say 5-10 years ago, and then you forget it exists. So you want to make sure, if you want to take it more seriously, that you look at everything that represents your profile and who you are, especially when you want to engage with corporate partners. You want to look at your experience. Is it up to date? Does it communicate everything that you do? Do you have any link to your website, any campaign, any examples that people would find interesting? And also, if you think of the very first things that someone would notice, let's say your headline, your about section, it should be a mix between who you are, your job, but also at the same time, what you want to communicate about your organization, if you want to wear the two different hats. So it could be an opportunity to make it more on a personal relationship. So you want to communicate your expertise, but at the same time, it should always be linked to your organization so that there is that ideal sweet spot. And so this is the profile, but then you also want to feel a little bit more comfortable in terms of creating content on your own, or the idea of relationship building on LinkedIn. So you can create content which is more like an inbound marketing approach. You create the content, people are more aware of what you do, the relationships with having existing partners, any opportunities they can learn more. So this is more of a way of the long term, but you can make it more straightforward. You can start using the platform to engage with potential partners, and we'll talk more about that. So you want to test the ground, you want to feel more comfortable on how it works, how you can leverage, and how to get started.
Yeah, that's really useful advice. If we take it a step at a time, you mentioned about the headline and the about
Yeah.
section. If we start with the headline, what kind of advice do you have for formatting a good headline?
So the headline is an interesting one because if you think every time you create a post, what someone says under your name is the headline. So it's something that everyone notices. So you want to make sure you either keep it very specific, so it's just your job title, which is the default, but also you can go a little bit further than that to explain what you do or mention a partnership or like you have 200 characters or something. How can you share a little bit more beyond your job title? So you could explain, I'm a senior corporate fundraising manager, and I help this and this, or wherever it's this in the last campaign. So you can give a few more details where people know what you do before they go into your profile. So they say sometimes this is a very important section because also if someone wants to search about you, this is what shows up on the search results on LinkedIn.
It's a really useful point as well to reflect on how much job titles mean in a corporate world.
Yeah, true.
Far more than maybe other forms of fundraising, what your job title is matters, and therefore how you frame your headline
Yeah.
matters. Nicole, who is the head of CSR at Burberry, used to be the head of CSR at Deutsche Bank. And she said that whenever she gets an approach or an email from someone with corporate fundraising in their job title, she just deletes it. Whereas if she gets an approach from someone called corporate partnerships, she reads it. And the reason for that is that when she sees corporate fundraiser, and these are her words, she sees them as a profit-seeking vampire
Yeah.
come to drain the bank account of the company and move on to the next victim.
That's true.
Whereas she sees a corporate partnerships manager as a person who's come to add value to the business. And so, not just in your headline, but in your kind of overarching piece, it's really worth looking at what your job title is externally. And I've spoken to some charities where like corporate fundraiser is what it has to be internally because there's bandings. But speaking about could we have corporate partnerships as an external title at least can really, really help you. Because mentioning fundraising in your headline to a corporate audience might make them think they're going to ask me for something rather than they're going to help me with something. So I think as we shape that headline, really worth thinking about what your job title is and how you frame it.
A really good point. And also, if you think when you want to focus more on outreach and then you want to send connections to prospects, it goes again into the headline. If they have that in mind and they feel like fundraising as a word, it means that it's not a genuine relationship, it's some specific ask. You want to think, how can I make it easier for someone to understand that it is about relationship building? Because everything obviously we want to talk about today is not just about doing an outreach that's just an annoying person on LinkedIn, like the ones that send connections and we want them to make them disappear. So we want to talk again about the idea of building that relationship and having that the genuine connection that could get into the partnership that we want.
If we move into the like about us section, you mentioned about the importance of the balance of talking about yourself and talking about your organization. What tips do you have for that?
So this is an important section. It's probably the longest section that you have on LinkedIn, and it's text. So it means that you can expand even further on the usual limitations of characters. And when we're talking specifically now about corporate fundraising, there is obviously the link between what you do and what your organization does. So you want to make sure that you have that space for someone before they visit the website or they check a specific page to understand what they can learn from you. We don't want them, again, to make it only about making the ask. It's about understanding who you are, how you stand out, what you might have done in the past. So this could also be about your own personal highlights and what you're doing right now with your organization. So it's a good idea to make an introduction without even starting a conversation with someone.
Nice. Out of interest, would you include a call to action in an about section, or do you think the call to action is kind of implicit through the connection request?
I think I would still include the call to action but also in a
Mhm.
way that it's not just about selling and making it too promotional, but just adding more context. And
Mm.
it's also the way we function in general. Like when we look at social media and we're interested in connecting with someone for any reason, you might be curious to find out more before you start a conversation. So this is a nice way to just have a quick look, learn some things. They might even give you conversation starters, or they might give you more context. But also if someone's curious from like a business perspective, it's a good idea if they want to visit their website to find out more.
Great. Someone has
Isabella,
asked
yeah,
in the chat, please can you show what you mean on LinkedIn with the about section? Looking at my profile now, not too sure.
let me try to get on my profile to share the screen. Second share
It's
this.
while Teresa is getting their screen up, I'll just explain that the headline is the section directly under your name, and the
Yeah.
about section is basically the first thing that then comes up.
So you see your profile. This is the starting point. Obviously, this is from my view. And then there's the about section. It only shows a preview of 2-3 sentences, but it's the one that where you can add more text. So as you can see, you can add as much text as you want, and I also added more details. You don't have the active link. You need to copy paste. So it's not necessarily about the call to action, but it's an easy way to just explain more things, who you are, what you do, which might not necessarily be at the rest of your profile. Or others are adding more personality, which is a great way to explain more things about you or more about your organization, any highlights. And as you can see, there's an opportunity to add a lot of text.
Great, thanks for that, Teresa. While we're kind of talking through the profile, my other question for you that I'm asking more for personal interest, I guess, is obviously, let's say we're at the White Wall charity.
Yeah.
We want our profile to be kind of half Andy King, half White Wall charity. But I've obviously previously worked at the Black Ceiling Company and the Blue Carpet Company. How much detail should I be giving about what my roles were at the ceiling and the carpet charities if I'm now at the wall charity and that's what I want to be the primary focus?
That's a really good question. I would probably add a few more details in the current role because that's what you do, that's what you want to communicate with others, but also because all your previous experience is still highlighting where you've been. It's a proof of your experience. It's always a good idea to not just keeping on a job title. You might want to add a couple of sentences. You might want to highlight a campaign, something that you've done well, because it's more like an expanded way of showcasing your profile, your CV. What would someone want to know? And obviously you want to highlight the work experience that makes more sense. If you did a job at 18 working at a cafe, you might not feel that I want to expand on that. So you want to keep it on the things that you're working on and maybe like the 2-3 last jobs that make more sense for you.
Great. So it's kind of that opportunity to show that you're in safe hands if you
Going
choose to build a
beyond the
partnership
profile, yeah,
with
beyond the
us.
CV, what you want to communicate.
Yeah, great. Jack, that sounds like there's ambitions to work at the dual company in future. I don't know, we'll see.
You never know.
Building a whole house, one charity at a time, it seems. Mark has said LinkedIn is starting to offer verification for people, saying that they are who they say they are. Is this something we should be doing? And do you think this will become increasingly important?
So this is a good question, and I don't have a certain answer because I'm also wondering on my own. Personally, the fact that it's asking you to add your passport details, it's still making me a little bit cautious. But also, if you think of that, how many details have we shared online? That's another story. Yes, I know that LinkedIn is promising that if you have the verification and you're a verified profile, you also get a more reach and engagement. But I've also seen from others, they say that this is not necessarily the case. So up to at this stage is not necessarily big value, but it could be important if you're worried that there could be a case of someone like impersonating you or something more about safety.
Great, that makes sense. So it's one of those things that it probably doesn't hurt, but it's not necessarily
Yeah,
necessary
exactly. It's
at this
not a
stage, I
necessity.
guess.
Yeah.
Great. Should we move to kind of LinkedIn specifically for corporate
Yeah, I'd love
fundraising?
to hear more from your end. What would you think? What have you seen the smartest corporate fundraising is doing on LinkedIn? So let's go even more specific.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there are new business practices you can use LinkedIn for, and there are account management things that you can use LinkedIn for. I would say at a minimum, the smartest corporate fundraisers are adding everyone from a company they have ever met ever the whole time to keep their network as broad as possible. There is an approach called being like Velcro, and the idea is that you want charity hooks through as many company loops as possible because it makes it harder to pull away like Velcro. And so the more people from a company partner that you're adding, the more they're engaging with your content and your charity's content, it's really, really helpful. But there are some kind of beyond that, some very specific tips, techniques, tools you can use that kind of vary from quite quick to quite time intensive. For example, there is lots of prospecting advice out there on effectively how to make a kind of a dream dozen or a top 10 that is usually a company that you've looked at because they match your values super, super well. But you're not always taught how to find a contact at that company.
Yeah.
And cold prospecting is so difficult that anything you can do to warm up a company is really, really worth it. So, for example, one of the things that you can do is go to a company's page, click on the People tab, and that tab will show you if you know anyone at that company. And this is a really useful way of getting your organization to tell you, we have any direct ins to that company. So, just as an example of this, St. John Ambulance, the first aid charity, are currently trying to prospect a company called New Day Finance. They are a credit company, and there's quite a lot of synergy about helping people see a new day. They've done the research, they can really see that they're a strong company, but they don't currently have an in to that company. So what we're doing is when we're meeting people, we're giving them this exact link that I've just popped in the chat now, which is the company's page on the People tab, and it will show you if you have any first, second, or third degree connections. So if everyone clicks that link now, they'll be able to see everyone who on LinkedIn says they work at that company. And if anyone has any first degree connections, if you could please tell me, because that would be great, because St. John Ambulance are looking for someone who can make an introduction. But what it will show you is a first, a second, or a third degree connection. A first degree connection is you know someone who works at that company. That's the dream. Yeah, ideally, obviously, you actually know them. A second degree connection is you know someone who knows that person, which is still a decent run in if it's for your charity. Let's say, I know Emma from SOS is on the call. If Emma had a second degree connection to someone at White Wall Company, it'd be fairly natural for her to say to that person, hey, I'm trying to get to your contact at White Wall Company because I work for SOS. Would you be willing to make an introduction? And a third degree connection is you don't actually have anyone directly in common, but it will show you that they work at that company. And this can be a really useful starting point for getting your organization to look at who they might know and who they might be willing to introduce you to. One of the biggest problems that corporate fundraisers face is we ask our organization, who do you know who works at a company? And you just get blank stares, even from the people who you know are super well networked. Whereas saying to them as a very first step, who do you know who works at New Day Finance? If you click this link, LinkedIn will literally tell you who you know who works at New Day Finance. It can build the organization's confidence in who it is that you get to know. The other thing that you can start to do is to work forwards. So there's two ways of prospecting. You can work forwards, you can work backwards. This kind of New Day Finance approach is working backwards. We've identified the company and we're working backwards to work out who we can get in front of. The other thing you can do is work forward from who you know you can definitely get in touch with. And this is where looking in depth at your colleagues and your trustees' profiles is a really good thing to do. for example, looking at where they've worked previously, so they're likely to know, looking at who's endorsed
Mm.
them is going to give you a decent sense as to people that they might actually know. One of the troubles you'll have with LinkedIn is that people are connected to people they haven't met. But if you have an endorsement or a testimonial from that person on your profile, you are going to know them because you're not going to give a job reference to someone you don't know. And it's a really good starting point for, hey, Teresa, I've seen that you have a testimonial from someone who works at the Green Carpet charity on your LinkedIn. And actually, they're someone I really want to work with. Is that someone you could introduce me to? Realistically, it's going to be a yes because there's enough of a relationship between you to have that testimonial. So I'd say, in summary, the things that people are doing is posting and connecting as much as they can, but also using it to start to prospect, either working backwards from company people profiles or working forwards from connections, endorsements, and testimonials.
Yes, really good point. And it goes back into the idea of what we're saying of becoming more strategic with LinkedIn. Once you're past the first steps, is trying to think, how can I use the platform in a way that makes sense for my targets, for the ones I want to connect with, or even exploring new companies or new specific people where you can feel like you can connect with and have a really valuable relationship there. So it's
Yeah.
dedicating more time, but in a way that makes sense for your job.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth remembering that LinkedIn is run by an algorithm, right?
Mm.
And so it rewards certain behaviors by giving you more of that behavior.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you start engaging with lots of people who work in ESG, because it wants your attention, the
Mm.
algorithm is going to start showing you more people that work in ESG. And so it's quite a quick place to respond to how you're giving it attention. And so thinking about who you meaningfully engage with and doing that on purpose is going to really help you to curate the LinkedIn experience that you want. For example, we're all corporate fundraisers in the room.
Mm.
If most of your comments is congratulating corporate fundraisers on new jobs, that's most of what LinkedIn will show you. Whereas if most of what you're commenting on is ESG partnership announcements and ESG campaign launches, that's what it'll show you more of. So it's really worth kind of making a conscious effort to use that time as cleverly and as carefully as you can.
It's a really good point on the audience, because sometimes we want to connect with others who share similar interests with us. You want to connect with more corporate fundraisers because you learn from each other, you have existing relationships. But at the same time, if we talk about the way you want to use LinkedIn now to engage with partners, you also want to make sure that there's another audience and you need to have those connections and they need to see your content so that you warm them up to the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Siri has said, it's really hard not to get drawn into the fundraising connection
Makes sense.
because we're interested in it, right?
Yeah, of
It's like
course.
seeing our friends go through stuff and we want to celebrate it with them. And it's probably worth saying we're not suggesting that you don't get drawn into the
Yeah.
fundraising connection. It's that you proactively seek out the content you want from ESG, marketing, HR people as well, so that the algorithm knows that it should serve you both. It's not necessarily an either or, it's a both and. And if when you're scrolling through your LinkedIn, all you're seeing is the fundraising connection, it's probably worth spending half an hour looking up what the companies you are working with or want to be working with are doing, posting comments, adding likes, that kind of stuff. A random tip I know, I might have learned it from you, T, is that the algorithm really likes comments that are at least 6
Yes, true,
words.
true.
So if you really want something to be paid attention to, adding a comment that's words or more, the algorithm will be like, oh wow, they really like that. Whereas if you post 5 words or less, they'll be like, eh. So looking for your corporate partners and adding lengthy comments is what will get your algorithm to start showing you more of that corporate space.
There's also another interesting thing I've heard about the algorithm on LinkedIn. I haven't seen it in action. Is that when you engage with someone through direct messages, let's say you start a connection, you're having some interactions as DMs, they tend to see your content more on the feed because it means that you already started a conversation, you know each other. So it means that you're interested and you get to see their content more. So as you can imagine, I'm not saying go and message every single person that you're currently following, but it's interesting, again, the idea of the relationship building and starting, you might connect with someone, but we tend to forget to send a message afterwards. We're just having them as followers. So even just connecting and say what you do, or like find a reason, of course, as you said, someone knows someone, there's some sort of introduction. But the more you have those conversations, the easier it becomes to make sure that those people that you're interested in, they're seeing your content.
That's a really interesting
Mm,
angle. Um, I've got one more question that we actually haven't discussed before, so I'm going to throw you a curveball if that's okay.
mm.
And then we've got time for questions. So if you do
Yeah, of
have
course, we've
any
got time.
specific questions for TRI, please do put those in the chat. Um, for many people in the room, we do have control over our own individual profile,
Mm,
but our kind of charities hub page is commonly handled by a
yeah.
comms team, by someone else. We don't necessarily have direct control over what's going out of the central LinkedIn.
Mm.
What advice would you give that person who can control their own LinkedIn, but can maybe only influence the kind of central charity piece?
So this is a really good point, and also important to know that on the feed, when you look at posts on LinkedIn, you might have already seen it. Most of the posts that we see, they're coming from personal profiles and not company pages, because the algorithm, again, they want to highlight the personal relationship and the personal experience from someone. And that's why we talk more lately on the idea of building your personal brand along with your organization's content. So there's obviously, as you said, Andy, the company page where the comms team is managing it. And obviously there are too many things that you want to share. And what I usually hear from the comms team is that I get too many requests. I need to talk about an event, about a volunteering opportunity, about the fundraising campaign. And then you feel like overwhelmed because you can't
Mm,
share 10 posts a day. So this is your starting point as an organization, the central hub, where you get to share a little bit of everything. But if you get different teams to create content on their personal profiles that make more sense on what they do, there's a really great opportunity both for the organization, because it means that they don't need to share every single thing on the page, but it also means that more people are going to see it, and actually more relevant people. You don't necessarily need to have every single person following the organization to see something about the corporate partnership. But if you're following, again, as we mentioned, the right audiences, you want to make sure that they see the content. And the fact that the algorithm anyway prefers personal profile posts, it's a great opportunity. So it's thinking
yeah.
again, how can I support the organization, but also make my job easier?
Interesting. That's really useful advice. And it is also useful to remember that the algorithm prefers
Yeah,
personal
there's a big difference in the engagement
comments.
and the reach. And I just noticed it on my own. When I look at the feed, it's very rare to see company pages unless I really engage with them. So they
Mm.
prefer to see posts coming from people rather than pages.
Huh, interesting. Um, Emma has said, how would you use LinkedIn to influence, for example, a staff vote slash charity of the year poll at a business? Do you want to
Hmm,
take that and then
good
I'll do it,
question.
or do you want me to go
I'd love
first?
to hear your thoughts first. I have some thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So my first thought is how much you can influence a staff vote on LinkedIn really depends on the demographic of who works at that
Mm,
company. Because, for example, a recent massive charity of the year vote was the Morrisons vote.
mm,
And the charities that were in the finals were all really heavily canvassing on LinkedIn. However, the percentage of Morrison staff that are on LinkedIn is probably pretty minimal because the majority of that voter base are going to be retail staff
mm,
who aren't necessarily on that platform. And so while you're thinking about a staff vote campaign, it's really worth thinking about the places, spaces, and platforms that those staff are actually going to be. Because if you're looking at a bank, if you're in the Morgan Stanley Charity of the Year, at that point, LinkedIn is probably a very viable platform. Whereas for the Morrison staff vote, it's actually much less likely. However, the two tips that I would still use kind of regardless is one, use that people page and encourage everyone in the charity to work out who they know at that company and send a personal message to those people. Hey, we're in the charity of the year staff vote. We would love it if you would not only vote, but if you would share this message
yeah.
on your platform, because again, the algorithm rewards personal posts. And secondly, I would, sorry, it was use the people page and make sure to be engaging with people's comments, because again, the more you engage with, say, Morgan Stanley colleagues, the more it's going to show you to other Morgan Stanley colleagues, and that's going to open you up to them. So try and infiltrate the spaces they already are, and
Yeah,
also
100%.
try and engage people personally.
And what I would
T,
also
have I missed
say,
anything?
no, it's exactly the case. What I would also add is that's exactly what we're talking about now, of activating more people to use their personal profiles before you need to make the big asks. So it's probably best to spend some time to understand how it works, how you want to use it as a team before you're ready to make the ask. Because if you have created more content before, it means that more people will be able to see that and have the
Yeah,
opportunity, as you said, for the engagement.
great. Thanks, T. Sarah has said, how about when there's a main post on an organizational page and then it's reshared with comments on our personal? Thoughts?
So this is a good idea if you want a quick way to add your thoughts to an existing post. And I definitely recommend, if you want to share something, to make sure that you add your take and you don't just reshare. But in general, when you reshare a post, it doesn't show up to as many people as if it's a brand new post. So let's say your page is sharing a link to a new campaign. If you prefer, it's easier to just share the link on your own and mention the page rather than just reshare, because the reshare for the algorithm counts as just something that already exists. So you add a little bit more to it rather than just adding a new post from scratch. But of course, it doesn't mean that every single post should take a lot of time. If you feel that you just want to add your thoughts about an event that happened or something very specific, you can always share your thoughts. But if it's something important, something that you really want to share more and make sure that people see that, you might want to create a new post.
So it sounds like in an ideal world, you'd be creating your own post. But if
Yeah,
it's a quick and
if it's a
dirty,
quick
I just need to
post,
get this
yeah.
done, then a repost is better than no post,
It's like a
maybe.
tweet from Twitter back in the day. You can retweet a post because you agree to that, or quote tweet to add your thoughts. But if you want to share something that comes from you and you get more people to see that, you want to create it as a new post.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Isabella says, how often should we be aiming to post?
Oh, good question. It really depends. Obviously, we don't want to scare people by saying you should post every single day. That's not the case. But in general, again, if we think about what counts as an active profile on social media, you don't want to show up today and then in 3-4 months' time, because it doesn't count as an active profile. So even if you engage with others in the comments and share some posts from time to time, let's say once a week or every 10 days, it still counts as being active. It's more about the consistency rather than just having a set frequency that you're following every single week.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think of it as like going to the gym,
Yeah, that's a good
where
point.
if you go from never going to the gym to going to the gym every day for 2 weeks, once per year, you never get fitter. Whereas if you go from never going to the gym to going to the gym once a week, then to twice a week, then to 3 times a week, that's great. I am like as much of a LinkedIn profile as I am an actual human being, and I still only post 3 times a week. I post on
Yeah,
a Tuesday, a Wednesday, and a Thursday because I just don't have that many thoughts. Like
makes sense. Makes sense. You
it's
don't
not
need to
possible to
post.
keep
Yeah.
making that content all the time. But I would say it's really worth starting with trying to comment on a post of someone you're trying to get in front of once a week and posting something of yourself once a week. And a
Mm,
really good time for engagement is midday on a
yeah.
Wednesday, because it is such a work-based platform. People are using it more on work days than any other day. And like a Wednesday lunchtime is a good point halfway through a week to go through a post. And if you can post something of your own and then comment on someone that you want to see more of in your news feed, that's a really good kind of first step.
Yeah, 100%. Leah is asking something similar. What tips do you have for what to share? And what content do people like to read on LinkedIn? So this would go back again to what we're discussing about the audience. So who do you want to talk to? Who is currently following you and who do you want to talk to? If we're talking again about corporate partnerships, what are the kind of posts that would be interesting to share in terms of your experience, what you have to share? But also, it doesn't have to be strictly only about that. They want to know more about who you are and what you do. And it might be even something beyond your current role. You might be volunteering for something else. You might find something interesting from an event you attended. It's again going back into who you are. And rather than feeling that I need to sell every single time I'm posting and I'm talking only about the fundraising ask.
Yeah, I completely agree. The three types of posts I would recommend are value posts, brand posts, and offer posts.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is value is something useful to your target audience. So something of interest about Charity of the Year votes, or something of interest about how, if you're a caring charity, carers show up in the workplace. Something of value to the target audience of corporate prospects and partners. Brand posts are "I'm just like you" type posts of something you have in common with your target audience. So if you're looking at loads of food companies, a personal post of you in a kitchen is actually a pretty good starting point. And then an offer post is what you want. It's not necessarily an explicit sales post,
mm,
but it's like one of my favorite corporate partnerships I've worked on looked like
yeah.
this type. So a value post is something that's useful to the audience. A brand post shows that you are like your audience, and an offer post is what you can do for your audience. And if you do one of each of those a month, you're probably ahead of 90% of the other corporate fundraisers on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. Truth.
And also, it always works well when you tag other individuals or companies. So, of course, it's about engagement. So it could be about the successful partnership. It could be attending an event and thanking others that you met, or great speakers, or anything that you feel that is about that human connection. It always works well. And if you want to attract, again, talking about corporate partners, it's always great to showcase your existing partners or previous relationships because they would feel valued. So it's not just about making them feel that you want to make a pitch. It's just showing the human connection there.
Yeah, professional achievements always go down super great.
Yeah.
Corporate partnership achievements are a great thing to show not just you off, but your charity as well. Um, Mark says, let's say I'm targeting the Orange Roof Limited.
Mhm.
I appreciate you keeping the theme up as a potential partner. The best way to get on their radar if no one knows them is to follow people, engage posts with lengthy comments, and try to get a conversation / coffee after that. Question mark. T?
I think I would say yes. This is the simplistic way to think about it. You want to make sure that you are on the radar. It's what Andy was saying earlier. Look at the connections. You might be connected with someone already, or you might want to have an introduction. And if you connect with someone, let's say you go from the starting from scratch approach, you find someone who might be a good fit, whether it's a job title or any sort of relationship. It's always good best practice. I'm always saying to people, just send a direct message and have an introduction, but not in a way that you want to sell something. It's just a genuine connection to make people feel that I'm not connected to you only just for the sake of making an ask. And then I would probably wait and make sure I might engage with their content or create content that they get to see. And then you want to think of an opportunity. How can I continue that conversation to make it as effortless as possible?
Yeah, completely. I think the that format of follow them, start to engage with them, send a personal connection request or a DM, find an excuse to move on to a personal conversation. There's a really good saying in corporate partnerships, which is if you ask for advice, you get
Mm.
money, and if you ask for money, you get advice.
Mm.
And so directly seeking out opportunities to get advice from people or to continue thoughts on something is a really useful place to go.
Yeah.
Saying, I loved your thoughts on this particular conference you went to, I'd love to hear more, for example, is a really neat place to go.
Yeah, 100%.
Great.
Looking at the chat. Lucy's
Um,
asking, what's your take on polls on LinkedIn? So polls work really well. They always get a lot of reach, which means that the algorithm just loves polls. And it's a nice way to just get some sort of engagement from people. It could be just something fun. Sometimes people use it to be more casual, let's say a Friday poll about something more personal. But you can also use it, I like using it as some sort of like quick market research or a way to just get someone's opinion, because you might ask something that has to do with a campaign that you're planning, or even just a tool that you want to use for your work, like something that's very specific. And people don't need to spend too much time. If they feel that they don't want to comment, they just get to pick an option. And it's just another way to create posts, as we said, that is about engagement and people just to understand what you do and what you're interested in. So it's definitely good to give it a try.
Great. Siri has asked, I've actually heard posting every day on LinkedIn is too much, 2 to 3 posts a week max. Otherwise, our own posts suppress each other.
Yes, in general, it's probably not recommended to post too many times, because the good thing with LinkedIn compared to other social channels, let's use Twitter because it's a very quick platform. The content lasts a lot on the feed, so you might get likes and comments even like 5 days after you post something, which means that the algorithm needs time for the post to be seen to a wider audience. So if you post too many times at once, let's say 3 posts in 3 days, if you haven't done anything before, then it might get all really crowded and just miss the opportunity to showcase all posts.
Yeah, my understanding is that the algorithm wants the first 24 hours of the post. It's like, oh yeah, we'll give this post some attention. And after 24 hours, the algorithm cares less. But if you were to post within 24 hours, the first post would be suppressed to prioritize the second.
Yeah.
But yeah, 2 or 3 times a week max is a decent place to aim for, especially because that's you posting and you can be commenting more than that if you have more time for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Joanna has asked, how do we utilize groups on LinkedIn? Is it worth it?
I don't think that they're really popular compared to, let's say, Facebook groups. They exist, and you could probably create a group if you want to keep it private for a specific community, if you want to make sure that they engage for a specific reason, but they're not as popular or engaging compared to other channels. So they still have a reason to exist, but not necessarily the priority.
Yeah, I would agree. Even as someone who's pretty active on LinkedIn, I'm not particularly active in any LinkedIn groups.
And I don't see many posts from groups. They just don't show up as much on the feed.
And I previously did a bit of market research into like Slack groups versus Facebook groups versus LinkedIn groups versus WhatsApp groups. And Slack and WhatsApp are often the most popular. So I think it depends on what you're looking for that group for. For example, if you're looking to put all of your existing partners into one group, maybe seeing what channels they're already using, if they're all using Teams or they're all using Slack, creating a space that is already where they are, because asking people to add another platform is quite an ask these days.
But also it's interesting, a recent charity I was working with, so they were planning a networking breakfast in person, and they wanted to make sure that you continue the conversation. So they decided to create a LinkedIn group because it's a nicer way than just sending connections to each other, to bring them all together and continue that conversation. You keep it private, the others don't get to see that, but it's still a way, if you think the professional element, how can I make sure that I have a reason to create a specific group?
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Great. Beatrice has asked, I've heard of LinkedIn Lives. How would you suggest doing that?
Yes, so they work well. LinkedIn Lives, if you feel comfortable with the whole idea of video and streaming and being live. For me, sometimes it just gets like too many things at the same time that you think about. But they work well in terms of the idea of relationship building. If you think that you might want to invite someone to talk about a specific topic, a specific campaign, it's another great way to find that excuse, what we were saying, to connect with people and try to engage others to have a conversation. And it's also a nice way to not make it about an ask and build that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. The kind of the best lives I've seen on Instagram have been kind of partnership interviews about why people have people and the best partnership case studies I've seen have actually been pretty late at night, and I'm just Googling the link for it. The Black Dog Institute of Australia do really good corporate partnerships case studies, and they've interviewed a couple of their partners on LinkedIn about why they've been working with Black Dog Institutes. I'll just put the link in the chat in a moment, but that is a really good way of kind of getting into your partner's network and audience as much as your own. Great. I'll pop the link in the chat in a moment while I'm hunting for that. Isabella has said, what's the best way to get a response from a DM with the aim of getting a call booked in?
It's always the hard one, isn't it? I feel like it really depends. Obviously, when it's more of the cold outreach approach, it doesn't necessarily mean that every single person will respond or even agree to take on a call. And it goes back into what we said, to try to find some sort of connection or some sort of context that you can add. Try to make it as personalized or as relevant as possible, the message. So if you're just meeting someone for the first time, asking for a call, they might not agree to it. But how can you make sure that the message is as personal and like as genuine as possible in a way that it makes sense to follow up? Or before asking for a call, is there another ask or something a little bit less straightforward that you can ask? So you want to think, or just test it on your own, of course.
Yeah, I completely agree with that personal element. I think it has to be clear why you're asking them and make it look as little like a copy and paste message as it can
Yeah.
possibly be, because the key thing that will stop them responding is them thinking you're sending that to everyone that ever connects with you.
Yes.
And so a message that says, we have this in common, we have that in common, ultimately we share a target audience, or ultimately we share a problem around speed, or ultimately we share this or that, saying, I'm reaching out to you at your company because your company is like my charity. Here are some clearly tailored things about us.
Yeah.
That's a really good place to begin, because it is clearly not copied and pasted.
Yeah, exactly.
I've popped the link to the Black Dog Institute case studies in the chat. It's really worth reading. The way that they explain themselves is great. If we go to one last question and we'll move to wrap up. Jody has said, I manage a corporate news page at my charity. Would you recommend me commenting on people's posts from this account or my personal account?
It's a good question. I would say you probably want to find a balance. The corporate news page is always the starting point, because even if you start a conversation on your own, chances are they would also look at the organization's page. So you want to make sure it's active. And you can treat it as the starting point, the central hub, where you get to share different things. But if you want to make sure that the content is seen by more people, this is where your personal profile comes in. So you want to make sure that you don't necessarily share the same thing, but you can add a different perspective or a different angle. And obviously in a way that fits your schedule. We don't say you should post like 10 posts in the end every week. Just trying to think, what's the difference? What do they want to see in the page? And what would make more sense from a personal perspective?
Great. Thanks so much, Teresa. Conscious that the kind of Zoom world that we live in, people are usually pretty back to back, and this has probably
Yeah,
been a
it's
lot of
true.
people's lunch breaks. They're probably most of the way through a jacket potato by now, so we'll kind of move to a wrap up here. My final question for you, Teresa, is if someone was going to take an action as a result of today, 2 or 3 actions, what would those actions be?
Good question. So I would say start with the basics. We said, first of all, look at your profile. Make sure that the key sections around the experience of who you are, what you do, they are all up to date without spending too much time, but just making sure they reflect what you're currently working on. Then if you want to take it more seriously with all the different things we discussed, you might want, especially if you're working with a team, to have a quick sense check with the team, the level of comfort and the level of readiness. So I'm always, when I'm starting a training, I'm trying to understand where the team stands. No matter what your job and your focus is, you want to understand where you are. If someone has never used LinkedIn before, then it's a different approach to someone who feels that I want to go from 2 posts to 4 posts per week. Or if you want to do it more carefully about the outreach and how you want to start, how can you do one step to give it a try and experiment a few things before you scale and you go even more into the channel? And that's the third thing, pretty much. Try to experiment with a couple of things in a small scale. Let's say, look at one company that you would identify as a dream partner and send 1 to connection requests, or create 1 post per week just to get more active on the profile and try to understand it a little bit more. And if it's more about an organizational strategy and perspective, it's probably good to involve different team members or even different departments if it makes sense. You want to make sure if it's more like a strategic decision to spend more time on the channel for different reasons, that you have that sort of buy-in. How about you,
Great.
Andy? What would you say?
I think I'd agree. Review your profile, create a realistic action plan rather than an idealistic action
Yeah.
plan. Do that action plan probably makes sense. The first step, I would say, from a corporate fundraising angle is to check that you are connected with all of your corporate partners possible
Yeah,
and
true.
everyone you've met, because that's going to immediately start suggesting other people from your corporate partners. But yeah, review your profile, create a realistic action plan, and do it is probably a great place to go.
Yes.
I've just posted both my LinkedIn profile and your LinkedIn profile in the chat
Thanks.
so that people can connect with us there. Obviously, it's a place that we're both quite often. If people want to hear more from you, get more from you, where can they go? What should they do?
Yes, so make sure I also include in the follow-up email, I'll share the recording and anything else you can find. So I'm running a training session with a couple of charities right now on specifically corporate fundraising. So just make it a little bit more specific. What do you need to do? Where are you standing right now? What do you want to do afterwards? And obviously, Andy is the best in terms of prospecting and making sure you identify those that you want to target. So feel free to share more, Andy, on how you can support someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Similarly, I'll share details in the link, but one of the things I find most frustrating is people doing cold prospecting when LinkedIn is such a good tool to stop you having to. So if you'd like to talk about how to have a warm pipeline, I'd love to help you and your charity with that. Otherwise, my next free event like this is in September. We'll put details. That's more about ethical fundraising. But otherwise, add me on LinkedIn, add Teresa on LinkedIn, and we'll
We're
see you
always
guys
around. Yes, of
very
course.
soon. Indeed, we're always online.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great day.